All right.
I'm calling the meeting back to order. We've reconvened at 1400 Marina Way, and the agenda has as a next item D1, the approval of the agenda, and then the approval of D2, the approval of meeting minutes. So with respect to the agenda, item B2, the minutes have just been given to a committee. They are 5 pages long, and there appears to be perhaps insufficient time to properly review them. So I would entertain a motion if there are no objections. I'd like to move the approval of the minutes from the last meeting to our next meeting. And then everyone will have a chance to read them and think about them, make corrections in addition. Art?
I have a question, point of clarification. Since we reconvened the meeting at a different location, do we need to take roll call?
If that's it, so we can. We actually for a quorum check limits. We would definitely do that. That's a demand we have to do.
Okay, we'll check our quorum. So
first we're dealing with the minutes. So you said if there's an injunction, then you just say that there won't be anything.
If there's no objection to minutes for the meeting of March 19th, March 5 and March 19th will be moved to the next meeting, which is April 9th. Perhaps any objection, if the minutes so ordered, we will move on back to approval of the agenda, which everyone has in their hands, if there is no objection.
No.
All right, with respect to ensuring that a quorum is present, I'd like to call roll. Guadalupe Amaya.
Present.
Liz Garay.
Present.
Ardo Rentila.
Here.
Don Gosney.
Here.
Summer Siegler is absent. Samantha Torres.
Present.
And James Sanders, chairman. So 6 members being present, quorum being 4. We are open for business. Okay, now with respect to the agenda, if there are no objections, I'd like to approve the agenda as submitted. Please look it over.
Make a motion to move the items.
It's been moved.
There's no second. That
no
was
second.
not an actual motion. Because you said if there are no objections, without objection,
You mean
that was not an actual motion. That's not a motion. In order to have a motion,
Okay.
we have to actually have all the words for a motion. We can't say the items moved or so moved or something like that. It has to actually contain that. So sorry, that's not a motion. You're asking, when you ask for no objections, that's plenty.
Do you have any objections, Art?
I have no objections.
Thank you. So moved. It's adopted. Okay. Item B3, anticipated future meetings, just for review. These dates were approved at our last meeting. April 9th, April 23rd, May 7th, May 21st, and June 11th. And for the record, I will be out of state on the 23rd, but I'll attend by Zoom, and Art will be presiding over the meeting. Is there any public comment? You're at item C1. Members of the public are invited to speak on any matter related to the 7-Eleven committee at this time. Members of the public may speak on individual items of interest in the agenda as the items are discussed.
We don't have any hands raised at
We
this
have
time.
no hands raised remotely.
Nope.
Okay. Moving on then to our discussion item, which is overview of the enrollment data for the district. Our presenter is Ellen Mejia Hooper. The committee will hear Ellen Hooper present an overview of the enrollment data for the district. Please draw your attention to the slides showing now on our website.
All right, welcome. Well, thank you for having me tonight. I am happy to report, and let me see if I can zoom out just a little bit so that we can see the whole thing. But that did not work the way I thought it would. Let's do it this way. Okay. So since the 7-Eleven committee is really talking about space, right? In the end, you're looking at these properties and wondering, do we need the space for a school site or not, right? So there's a couple steps to getting to how the number of students we anticipate relate to space. So the number of students that are coming into our district is called our enrollment. The amount of space that we have within our schools, the amount of seats, the number of desks is our capacity. And so when you divide those two across each other, you actually get the utilization number. And so utilization is represented by a percent. And it lets us know if we have enough space to house all the students that we're anticipating having. And to be able to understand enrollment, we do have a third-party demographer. So the data I'm presenting tonight is not my own. I did not create it. It was created by SchoolWorks. However, they use the tried and true methods of any demographer, because really there's only two ways to get students into your district. They're either born here and go to the school, or there's new housing development, which brings new students in at any age. So if they're born here, we have to wait 5 years or 4 years now that we have TK for them to show up. And we're always happy to have them. And if they come and move into a house, they may be a kindergartner, they may be a senior in high school. So it could be anywhere in between. And what ends up happening, the only other factor that really affects it is how many of those students we capture. So just because you live in our district doesn't always mean that you're going to attend our schools. So the demographer compares historically how many students we capture, and that's this demographic trends, how many kids we capture and which schools they choose to go to. Because while we have neighborhood schools that are have boundaries that say this is your home school, we do have a transfer policy that allows families to choose other schools besides their home schools. So they look at both how many people we capture, as well as what schools people choose to go to. And those two factors go into understanding the number of students we predict are going to be in our district in the future. And those are the things that lead in. So you'll see that birth rates is right here, right? So that's how many new babies we have. And then that new residential housing development piece get formed together with the demographic trends to tell us how we can predict. Now the yellow box over here is a little hard to read, but that's that capacity component. So once we know how many students we have, we also know how much space we have. You look at both of those together and you say, oh, we have enough room or we don't have enough room. And that can vary across the district our size, but that gives us an overall picture of what capacity, enrollment, and utilization is. So any question on those three terms or how we get to demographic projections?
So are we suggesting that for a child to go to a district school, a traditional public school, they must have an address within that city or district?
Not necessarily. That's not a requirement to enroll. You can do out of district transfers, or if you currently don't have an address, there are means to be able to allow our unhoused students to attend our schools.
Thank you.
As an example of that, my 4 years of high school, I lived in Vallejo and attended 4 years here, an inter-district transfer.
Yeah. So there are a variety of ways to handle that. Any other questions? Okay,
Okay, I have a question.
yes.
And do we take into accountability, like the citywide trends, especially with like multi-family homes and just like
So they use census data
okay,
as normally the backbone, and then there is also information that's produced by hospitals by zip code of what birth rates are. So there's a variety of ways that we understand the population that live within the school district.
One question.
Yes.
How fine is the data? In other words, are we looking at district-wide or are we looking at the service area of a particular school?
We're gonna look at both. Now,
Why does the demographer look at it?
well, they produce the projections as both school by school as well as district-wide. Obviously, the district-wide data has some level of reliability that a school by school data doesn't necessarily have to the same extent. So I forgot to start my spiel with, I hope everybody polished their crystal ball before they showed up tonight. Because while demography, I mean, we know that there were a certain number of people that were born in the last 5 years, and we're really hoping they show up to our schools when they become old enough. So we can count that, but anything beyond that, we can't count. We also know what kind of developments are coming down the road because the cities have to go through a permit process, and there's a variety of steps that let us know when new development is happening. But we also know that new development will either start or stop depending on economic factors. So at this point in time, we're doing all our best guesses of all of those things, but that's what they are, right? There's no guarantee that the kid's gonna show up exactly where we think they are when we think they will. So there's some level of adjustment there.
Regarding the new developments,
Yes.
how many projects within the area do you guys have listed? Do you know the statistics and the number of units that will be available?
I do have a list of what was included. So we have, and this is data that's collected from all 5 cities as well as the unincorporated county area. We have 37 developments listed with units, remaining units, 6-year projections. So I'd have to get some level of clarification of how they're listing. I believe what overall we know of 6,000, a little over 6,000 units that can come online. However, about 3,000 of them we're predicting to be built within the 6-year projection window.
So you're looking at density for projects?
Yes, so there's different rates that are used, and they're historically based upon what kind of housing that is being developed and what we expect our generation rate to be, which is that rate of how many, if I have a single family house, we predict a certain number or decimal point of student to come out of that single family. It's more for multifamily housing than single family housing. It also depends on the number of bedrooms that are accounted for in each type of development. So we only count developments that are quite a bit into the process, like your Hilltop one, where it's still very ambiguous about whether it's medium density, whether it's high density. Like, we can't count that yet because there's not enough specificity what that's going to produce. But things that do have specificity are in the list.
Regarding the new developments, if there's 37 developments, do they tell you if they're going to incorporate a park or city community area or anything like that?
No, because we're really interested in how many housing units are within that development and what type of housing units they are. So that's not data that we're
Privy to.
tracking.
The information does come from local cities and county, building departments, is where this information is generated from.
Correct.
So we would have to check that.
Well,
Yes.
one of the problems that we run into, we have to understand that not every housing development is the same.
Correct.
I mean, depending upon where it's going to go, you might have smaller families or families with no children at all, as opposed to other areas with much larger families. Again, unless you got that big crystal ball, you have no way of guessing how many children, school-age children, would be included in these developments.
You don't, but by tracking historic data of how many students for that particular type of housing unit we have captured in the past, there's some level of definition that can come from that, right? But anytime you look in the future, you are looking in the future and nobody knows absolutely 100% this is exactly what's going to happen.
I just wanted to reiterate for the viewing audience or the future viewing audience that these numbers are purely for district schools and not charter schools.
Correct. But there is a understanding that the charter schools affect us and they have historically affected us. So it's not that we're ignoring that they exist either. And like putting all of our eggs in like, oh yeah, we're going to have every student come to our school in the future and they're not going to go to charters. So it is built into the formulas to acknowledge the fact that they exist. But their projections are not included in this, yes. Anything else? Good? Okay. Let's get to the meat of it then. All right. So the enrollment projections, this is district-wide. So this is the big picture. We're zooming out. This black line right here, let's see, where'd my arrow go? Come back, arrow. Right here, this black line right here represents the history to the future. So everything that's to the left of the black line is historic. So that's where we've been. Anything on the right is where we're projected to go. And the color bars that you're seeing there, the orange at the bottom is our elementary population. The green in the middle is our middle school. And the blue at the top is our high school. And I mean, as you can tell, we are declining in enrollment and are projected to continue to decline in enrollment. This is not unusual for most California schools at the moment. It's known that statewide we have declining birth rates. If the babies aren't being born, they're not showing up to school 5 years, 4 years later. However, it does get counteracted by new development. So right now, our new development is not making up for our loss of enrollment from either folks moving away or babies not being born at the same rate they were before. So that's the big picture. But as we start looking at our school sites or the sites that the 7-Eleven committee is considering, we're going to look at what the capacity is or what the utilization of these schools is projected to be in 6 years. So this is if we don't change anything, we keep the same programs in place at those schools. What are we projecting our students to be, and what does that mean for the capacity of that school site? And so in 6 years, which is not today, these are not the utilization rates of today. We're looking first at Adams. So we have 3 separate maps, one for elementary, one for middle, and one for high school. And so because each property, right, belongs to a feeder pattern for each one of our grade levels. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit because it's hard to see. At our elementary level, the site was inconveniently located right below the label of Mara Vista. So we have an arrow instead of a circle in this particular case. But it is for the, this is Adams, right? Yes, yeah. Just double checking. For Adams, that is within the elementary boundary of Mara Vista. And it's projected to have a utilization rate of 71%, almost 72, in 6 years. There are surrounding schools of Riverside, Michelle Obama, and Ford, all of which are kind of in the prime utilization rate. 90 and above, we start to wonder, are we going to be okay? That 80 to 90 is like, you're really golden as far as if you are a principal at that school site. You have some flexibility, you can move stuff around, you're not nervous that if another student shows up, you're gonna run out of classrooms. It's not necessarily incredibly efficient, but when it's not super tight, you have some ability to be flexible. You start getting below 80, there's definitely some wiggle room and some space at the school site.
There's a question raised in Q&A.
Yes.
Or
What, I'm sorry, I missed the
appears to
question.
be a question raised, if you look at the Q&A bar above.
Oh, yes. What is the reason that the middle school enrollment has the biggest decline instead of the elementary? So that's an interesting question. What happens over time with enrollment is that grade levels move up, obviously, right? So when your kindergarten coming in is smaller than your sixth grade going out, that's what causes that decline, right? And so as that happens, you have to look at the difference between the year coming in and the year going out to tell what the change is going to be. And so what that's telegraphing is over time, the kindergarten class down here is smaller than the sixth grade class leaving. And so that happens. And then once they get to seventh grade, they move into this middle school area. And middle school is hard because it's where your demographics show the most variability because there's only 2 years, right? You got seventh and eighth grade. So when you're only looking at a data set that's 2 years, it's always like the most dramatic of changes because the slightest change is what will be much more pronounced in a 2-year data set than it is in a 7-year data set or an 8-year data set.
Do we have any K-8 schools in our district?
We
then?
do.
Yes.
We have several of them.
Okay, so wouldn't that affect some of this data?
No,
We
because
look at, when we look at middle schools, I keep thinking junior high school, I'm an old guy. Because the middle school is 7, 8, maybe 7, 8, 9, where the K-8 would dip into some of those students.
So for this particular chart, it is purely based on grade and not what school you attend.
Okay.
So when we say middle school students here, whether they're going to a K-8 or a traditional middle school, they're counted as a middle school student. So all of the green are all of our 7 and 8 graders.
Okay.
But that is a good point because we do have to split some of our schools' enrollments just because of that component of being a K-8 between these different bars. It's not as clean.
Question. So
Yeah.
say for instance, year 2014 and 15 in comparison to 28, 29, there's about 3,300 difference in kids and about 1,200 that go up from TK elementary to middle school. Do you guys know where kids go to? Do they move out, transfer out? What have you guys seen? There's
Historically, there has been a drop in this particular district at the middle school level for a very long time. So we lose quite a few students in the middle school years and they come back to us in the high school years. I think there's a variety of reasons for that. However, our transfer office and the educational group have better tracking of what that means and exactly why it occurs.
Okay. We go back to the maps then.
Yes. So, so the middle school here, boundary at least, is Korematsu. It is projected to be 80%. This happens just at the end of the 6th year. So there's a little bit of a drop off that happens right at the end. I know historically Korematsu has maintained a very full enrollment. However, and then Dijon, which is the next closest boundary to the site, is at 51, almost 52%. So if you're looking of, are we going to be okay by space? Here it's showing yes. At the high school level, we have El Cerrito boundary, which is what the school site or the Adams is in, and it's at 101% capacity. Now, when we show something like that, especially at our high schools, there's a lot of flexibility in a master's schedule. And so occasionally you're going to end up with schools over 100%, but that does not mean that we're going to have a kid sitting out on the sidewalk. It's okay. We're going to make space for them. It just means that we are doubling up on things. We're filling in a prep period. A teacher is teaching 6 periods a day instead of 5, or whatever the offering is at that school. So they take an extra, they're filling in with their prep. So there's different ways that you can accommodate a student if you see something over 100%, but it's definitely a challenge, right? Kennedy, however, next door is at 64%. And over the next 6 years, we're hoping that the rebuild is going to help Kennedy along.
Question?
Yeah.
So is our rebuild and our capacity expanding plans at schools being factored in these projections?
No, this is purely a historic, the historic trends pulled forward. So that's what I was saying when we started is we look at these things and then we say, okay, let's look at, we have something over capacity here. We have something under capacity over here. What kind of adjustments can we make? What can we think about from a program perspective? Do we need to open the TK on this school site instead of that school site? So all of these different things, this is a tool for us to look forward and say, how can we better balance our schools? And it's not a fixed thing, right? Because in the grand scheme of things, if you look overall district-wide, we should have plenty of space because we're housing our students right now and we're declining enrollment. So in 6 years, we should have even more space than we do now. Is it equally distributed? Not exactly, but we're a big district and it's one that you have to come forward to that challenge and say, what can we do to make this work the best for our families and our programs?
You know, speaking only about the high schools there, I mean, traditionally we have drawn the lines in some strange ways, almost like Stevie Wonder given a pin. I mean, at most of what you're seeing there surrounding that yellow dot, almost everything right above the word El Cerrito used to go to Kennedy High School. But if you lived right across the street from Kennedy High School, you went to El Cerrito High School. It never made sense. But you want to balance those numbers between Kennedy and El Cerrito so that they're closer. Just get out there with the eraser and start redrawing the lines about where you're going to go to school. Of course, then you get the political pushback. And one school is considered better than the other school. Nobody wants to do that.
All right, so moving on to Harmon Knolls.
For another question.
Oh, yeah. Oh, did I get it? Or I might have just not resolved that one. Answered live. Okay. All right, Harmon Knolls. So if we come over to the elementary map. We have Harmon Knolls is in Highlands boundary area, but it's relatively close, at least from an aerial perspective, to Bayview. As far as the boundaries go, both of those schools have significant space available. If you go a little further afield, we have Terra Hills, Montalvan, and Lake that are also surrounding this area. For the middle school, we have Helms, although again, we're relatively close. The borderline between Helms and Pinole is the backside of the Hilltop Circle. Helms is it has significant amount of space, and Pinole is at 78%. At high school, We have Richmond High School, and again, the boundary is the same as it is in the middle school, so right on that backside of the Hilltop Circle. And Pinole Valley is on the other side at 74%. So overall capacity is not an issue in that particular area. Near Portola, or Portola, depending on how you pronounce it, we have a little bit of a different story, although it's a mixed bag. We do know that there is development around the BART corridor. So that's something that's occurring. And you can see part of that reflected in this map where Fairmont, Harding, and Madera all have capacity over 100% and at least projected in the 6-year period. Now at our elementary levels, we try to set aside a few rooms to be able to support some of our programs because students don't move around. You need places for students to go for some of those support things. And that's part of how you accommodate at an elementary school additional capacity that's over 100%. However, we are looking at this area to try to figure out where we want to go in the future to be able to help alleviate the capacity there. However, as you saw in your previous meeting, Portola is not a developable site for a school facility. So while capacity may be an issue at our elementary level, at least close into the campus, Portola is not a solution for that per se. We do have adjacent schools that are at a smaller utilization percentage, which may be part of the solution for this. But we are continuing to study this area to figure out the best steps forward, knowing that the projections are what they are. At the middle school, Korematsu, we've covered, as well as El Cerrito. We've talked about, these are the same 2 schools that are the boundary area for Portola. Moving on to Seaview. So Seaview is right on the edge between Montalvan and Shannon. It's technically in the Montalvan area, but just by hair. Montalvan is at a 96% utilization. Shannon is just over 100%. And then we have Terra Hills and Bayview as additional areas, as well as Murphy around as you keep circling out from Seaview. For our middle school, we have Pinole Middle, again at 77, almost 78, and Pinole Valley High at almost 75% utilization. And so then past this is the historic data that was provided previously. But any questions on the four maps?
Can you remind me what was located at the Portola site?
So it was a middle school.
Portola Middle School. So we had Castro Elementary School. Castro Elementary was closed and then rebuilt as a middle school, which was Korematsu Middle. So we relocated the Portola campus to the Castro site as a new build and closed Castro Elementary. And that's what mainly flowed into Fairmont and the surrounding schools.
Okay, so Portola used to be elementary school.
No, middle school.
Well, it used to be the middle school.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And Korematsu is the middle school.
So when Portola closed, you just built a site at Korematsu for that area, or?
Yeah, so it was the rebuild of the Portola site or campus, if you will. The middle school was rebuilt on an elementary campus, and so it was elementary school was torn down, and the site was developed as a middle school site.
Okay.
And really, the effect was the closure of an elementary.
Question? Can I ask a question? With respect to Fairmont, is is there any, does the district own the land on which El Cerrito's library is currently existing? Is that,
We do not own that parcel.
oh, thank you.
They had didn't they have a few small buildings, the library? Well, that was on.
The senior
district
center
property.
was built on the Fairmont property, and then we absorbed that property back.
Yeah. Okay, you took me on a tour of it, that's why I brought it up. See, I paid attention.
So that concludes the discussion of capacity, enrollment, and utilization.
Question, regarding, say, for instance, just Steak, where it shows 57.5%, and the other schools, Madera, Fairmont, Harding, Kensington, are above capacity. How come there's low enrollment there? What's the difference? What are people not going or attracted to that area for?
Yeah.
That's up to one.
Significantly less.
There's another component. What is the quality of the site at Stage? In other words, how old is it? And what's its current condition? Does it need more repairs, some sort of refurbishment?
So Stage was on the list for modernization, so it has not been modernized. The board has approved $43 million for a renovation to that campus. So we're working on that now.
Okay.
Stige is the oldest school in our school district, 82 years old,
Probably. as you think about it.
1942.
Like many of our campuses, they were built over time, right?
Right.
Different portions of the buildings were, date back probably to the 40s and could be over and they had been replaced.
So the age of the school is also a contributing factor to compared to different schools. If we're looking at Downer or Grant, those schools are in much better shape than Stage.
Well, and our boundary areas are traditionally across the state, good practice of creating boundaries is looking at geographic breaks, right? And so railroad tracks, freeways, major streets, especially when the populations used to walk more, were all things that you tried to use as demarcation lines to say this is one boundary area and this is the other, because it was difficult for students to cross and potentially dangerous for them to get from one side to the other. And so that is a component of how I believe, I of course was not around when these boundaries were originally drawn, but you can notice that it is along the 80 corridor is where the boundary line currently is. Now, whether it needs to stay there or not is a question for, groups to come. But that is right now, Stage is wedged between the 580 and the 80 freeway. And so that's why you get that shape that you get of the point down at the bottom. And so one of the things we could look at is whether or not that wants to change as the boundary line or not. But then we also have to kind of reflect on, how we're getting students from one place to another. What's the distance from the school itself to the boundary in total, and the attraction rate that we can maintain for those students.
I mean, just looking at it, it seems obvious that would be a beneficial change to change that boundary line. And, people might get upset because they have to go to one school or the other, but you've got to mix things up to make it attractive.
You aren't gonna like that. Anytime you move boundary lines, you're gonna get riots.
Boundary lines can be highly contentious.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, that's what I had to present.
Is there a question up there?
Yeah. Another question? What can we learn from the over-enrolled schools to improve other low enrollment schools? That's a really awesome question. I think that's part of what our transfer office and the group working on enrollment is looking at across the district is how we can attract students overall, and what our students or what are some of the schools doing part of it is not necessarily the school itself, though. It's based also on where the new development is counteracting that birth rate decline, right? And so remember, this is in today's numbers, this is 6 years out numbers. So part of it is historic attraction, but part of it also is where we have development. We know along the BART line, we are anticipating some development. So it might not just be because the school is attracting folks, it's that there's actually more folks living in that boundary area. So it's a mixture, but it's definitely something the school district's looking at, but I'm not personally in depth into that data. What can the board do to make the best of the district in whole instead of their area schools only? Well, that's a great question for the board. And so I think I'm going to redirect that one to them.
Chicken.
But I mean, we're actively, no matter what, enrollment is a huge factor when we are facing our budget crisis, right? We know that you are looking at two different factors that are coming together, and one of them is, can we increase enrollment or can we increase capture rate, or can we increase attendance? And all of those things are things that we're trying to figure out. We're part of a group that's looking across the county that's looking at attendance data to say, what can we do to help get students in their seats more? Not only because the school district will receive more money to do that, but really because students need to learn, right? And they're not learning if they're not in their seats. And so looking at these different pieces is something the district's doing, not only for like the attraction rate, but also just the attendance version.
Go ahead.
I'll go first. Do you know if you guys have enough teachers at each of these schools?
Well, remember, this is 6 years out. So at the moment, and today I don't know, but at the same time, the 7-Eleven committee is wandering far from the land use to staffing levels, right?
I guess I'm just asking if say for instance, again, back to Madera, Madera's overly crowded at that school. Is it Steve doesn't have enough teachers to teach, or?
This information is based upon capacity, so it has nothing to do with, having teachers. It's really, you have the rooms and the children in the seats.
No,
If I can offer an observation, Madera is landlocked. It cannot expand.
I'm not asking for it to expand. I'm asking to distribute the students to other schools.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
Yeah, if we're talking about drawing boundaries, that's really the province of the board. So we can't really recommend redrawing boundaries. We have to make a decision with respect to these sites, whether they are going to be needed within this area, the surrounding area.
Yeah, this committee is really uniquely placed because in the grand scheme of things, normally when a 7-Eleven committee is convened, it's not necessarily looking at school site properties that are really not available to be school sites any longer. And so it's kind of an interesting viewpoint where most of the legislation talks about, yeah, you should look at enrollment and capacity and make sure there's room so you don't give away a property that you're going to later need. But if we can't use it anyways, it sort of negates the reason that you're looking at enrollment and capacity data.
Yeah, what I happen to notice that El Cerrito, which is a more affluent area, has more students per capita, and it seems to me that they have better schools, newer schools. So I think that people are attracted to that. So if Highland was built, for example, at the Harmon Knowles site, it would attract more students because right now we're discussing Hilltop Mall, and they're looking at 15 dwellings per acre for density, and roughly about 1,200 homes. So the only other options you have up there really are charter schools, but I think there's a lot to be said for new schools, the attraction to new schools, because there's this stereotype that, hey, new schools, you're getting a better education.
I have a request. With respect to the developments, which are inputs to this capacity, could you, break out, I mean, you gave us an overall picture, but could you break out the developments that really pertain to the sites that we're looking at?
We can, but again, for at least the, at least 3 of the sites, they aren't appropriate for school sites anyways. So while we can give you the data, I don't know if it's going to particularly help the committee, because we aren't going to be able to solve any of our enrollment issues with.
Well, right, so let me refocus my question. Can you do it with respect to Harmon Knolls, which is the one buildable site?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Question.
Yeah. Oh, question. We did that one.
Yeah.
Shall the
outside of
district work with the cities to encourage housing developments to help the district's enrollment?
It's not their purview.
Yeah, that's beyond what we're.
That's outside of the scope of our purpose.
If I may, I think in terms of workforce housing, that is something we do have the ability to influence as a body here.
Sure. I mean, there's discussions going on to try to address workforce housing. They're very preliminary. But it is something that the board has expressed some interest in.
If I can speak to that issue, workforce housing, under the statute that we are authorized, and I hate to cite numbers, but 17391B of the Ed Code puts the development of workforce housing outside the purview of the 7-Eleven committee. In other words, the 7-Eleven committee is not necessary as a first step to have the district or any district start to construct housing for the workforce. And having been at the low end of the salary scale at one time in my life, I can definitely speak to the interest the workforce would have in that, but it's not our purpose today.
Can you restate the statute or the?
It was Education Code 17391. B as in boy.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Bert?
Yeah, just as a side note, the Hilltop Mall project will be going in front of the city council approximately in May of this year. So something we might want to look at.
We are paying attention to it.
Okay. Very good. I think that brings us to the end of our discussion. We're 10 minutes ahead of schedule so far as our time to adjourn. Oh, the resource document that's there, I have the historic data. If anyone would like to have this, and I think you can have copies made and distributed to you if you haven't have a copy already. It's part of the, it's attached to the agenda, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, all right, so our next meeting is on the 9th of April. And we'll get together with staff and we'll work up an agenda for that meeting. If there are no objections, I would like to adjourn the meeting. At 7:50 p.m. or 9.